everyone, it's Yuri, and today's video is gonna be a lot of stuff. I did just get another plant package. This one is just one plant, and I thought about doing an unboxing for just this plant, but then I also wanted to talk a little bit more about what it's like to import plants and what I wish I knew before I had started to import plants. I think this is my 4th or 5th import at this point, and this one is from Puerto Rico. Most of my plants have come from Asia, but I have learned a lot of things since my first import, and I wish I had known these things before I had done my first import. So I figured it might be helpful for some of you who are thinking about it, and I wanted to put together a video and unbox this plant and talk through 5 things that I wish I knew before I imported plants. So this was the fastest import that I've had. I'm in California and this came from Puerto Rico, and I feel like it took about a day to get here. So my seller shipped it out yesterday and I received it not too long ago. So yeah, it probably took about 16 hours to get to me, which is the fastest I've ever received anything. Usually if it's coming from Southeast Asia, it has to go through a fairly long process, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. But this one, they just shipped it, and I guess it was okay. They didn't confiscate the package during transit. So I was a little bit worried about that, but I figured that the seller had already had experience shipping plants to California, and she probably knew what she was doing. So while I open the box, I do want to talk about one thing that has come to my attention recently with the rare plant community thriving. There's been a lot of plant theft. So some stores are getting plants stolen from just their back greenhouses, which really sucks. And someone was caught on camera recently stealing plants with a gun. So that's terrifying, and it's really sad that people are resorting to theft to capitalize right now on these really expensive plant prices. I don't know what happened, but over the past few months, I've just noticed that the prices have gone up quite significantly, and it's just starting to become a little bit wild in terms of how expensive plants are getting and how much people are willing to pay to get their dream plant. So on that note, I do want to talk about plant theft and plant poaching. So lots of people have been going out, especially if they're in tropical areas where some of these rare plants just grow naturally outside. People have been going and taking them and then selling them immediately to get profit on them. So that's been a trend that's been happening recently. I don't personally know offhand because I don't live in a tropical climate. I'm in California and it's quite dry here. But I've heard that a lot of people are selling these poached plants, and it's causing actual damage to these ecosystems because, it's like deforestation. It's not great, especially if the volume of poaching is high. So that's one thing that I wished I had known before making my first plant purchase. I do think that the places I purchased from are reputable. They've been selling plants for much longer than this rare plant obsession that's been taking over houseplant hobbyists all over the world. So I do feel like they were doing this already. They have greenhouses where they're growing all these mother plants. They'll take cuttings from them and propagate them. You can kind of see this too on their Instagrams and other videos that they've posted. So that's one thing that I did wish I knew, is to be thoughtful about where I'm sourcing the plants and where the sellers are sourcing the plants as well. This is something that's really hard because you can ask the seller, and if they're poaching plants, they're not going to admit to that they just went into the jungle and found a bunch of them and just grabbed them. So I think some of the signs is, you can see how long the plant shop has been in business, how long have they been exporting plants, and what do their grow spaces look like. Most of them will have photos of these big greenhouses where they have these mother plants that they are constantly propagating from, and different seedlings and things like that. So if they just are only selling random, seemingly one-off mother plants, and they probably haven't been in business for that long, no clear advice I can give there besides just we should all be thoughtful about where our plants are being sourced from. If you have more specific ways that we can try to be more thoughtful plant owners, please let me know in the comments below if you have any specific resources that we can look at to help reduce the amount of poaching that's happening. The second thing that I wish I knew before importing plants is that processing takes a really long time, and that's especially true if you want to do it the legitimate way of getting a phytosanitary certificate and working with a vendor who actually cares about trying to sanitize the plant as much as possible to reduce the possibility that the plant comes with bad bugs or a virus and all the other things that live things can carry with them. So processing isn't just about getting a phytosanitary certificate and then getting it signed by some government official. There's a lot of steps prior to that point to even get that certificate, which includes actually sanitizing your plants and taking the soil off of the roots as much as possible and doing a lot of different steps along the way. I'm sure the nurseries do more than what I'm saying, but this is just what I've perceived personally as someone who has purchased plants. So it takes a lot of steps, and there's a decent amount of quality checking, and then of course there's the packaging part of it, and then they need to ship it out. So all of these things add up, and I would say the fastest turnaround I've had so far was about 2 weeks since ordering. And I just don't expect that anymore. So most of my imports have been taking about, 1-2 months on average, and then some of them have been taking much longer than that. So just something to keep in mind. If you want immediate gratification, you probably don't want to be importing plants, especially because they could arrive in bad condition. Just know it's going to take some time, and there's a reason for it, and it's probably a good thing if they're taking some time to process it and making sure that it's getting to you in the best condition possible. Oh, she wrote a little thank you note. I'm gonna block her name because I don't think she wants to be known, but it says thanks. I haven't even talked about what this plant is. This plant is a Philodendron Red Moon. I'm sure you've already seen this in the title of my video and the description, but I have not verbally said it yet on camera. So this is the Philodendron Red Moon. My friend Vivian got one from the same seller, and I have been obsessed with it. And she did sell a cutting of the plant a while back, but I missed it. So thankfully the seller had some more growing, and I was able to persuade her to sell me one of them. So before I open this up, I want to talk about the third thing that I wish I had known before importing plants, and that is that the plants will likely lose the leaves, some if not all of the leaves that they came with. And part of that is there's always shipping stress, there's also acclimation to a new environment. You also, the seller usually is taking the plant out of soil and then sanitizing all of it, goes through this whole process and then planted back into soil again. So there's a lot of steps here that cause significant trauma to the plant, and if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll notice that I really focus on the root system for these plants and not necessarily the leaves they came with. If you're looking for a plant that's just beautiful out of the box and ready to be displayed, you probably don't want to import plants because it just is going to take a while for the plant to adjust and then to put out a new leaf that then you can display and enjoy. I have some examples actually behind me. So most of the plants behind me have been imported, and this one in particular, so this is a Melanochrysm. You'll notice that it is putting out another leaf, which I'm excited about. But this leaf actually is a new leaf under my care. This plant originally came with 2 leaves bigger than this leaf, but the first one fell off immediately, and then the second one died a very slow, painful death, and it looked really sad and yellow for a really long time. So now it's at a place where, this is a beautiful leaf. I love it, it's soft. I actually loved it right when it came out because the color was a bit more pink. This is beautiful, and it took a while. So I think I imported this plant from Ghana. So that was one of my first imports, and this took a while. It did not look like this out of the box, and it lost both the leaves that it came with and took a really long time to finally put out a new leaf. This is another example. This is a Verrucosum, but you'll see these two leaves it came with, and it's a little bit dry on the top and it's yellowing. I'm probably gonna clip these off fairly soon. This is a new leaf that came out and it's gorgeous, and I'm super stoked about this. But you normally don't see that these are the leaves that it came with, and they probably won't stay on for that long, whether you cut them off yourself or they just fall off naturally. So you probably need to be okay with waiting while your plant is a bit ugly until it recovers and heals and then starts growing all these new beautiful leaves. But it just won't be like that when you get it. So this plant is covered in some cotton, a little bit of dirt on it. Trying to think of where to put this trash. I'll deal with it after. Whew. It is pretty and stuck. Okay. Wow. So you'll notice one of the leaves is already yellowing. That's okay. And the leaves are wet, but thankfully they were not wet for too long. Like I said, this plant came really quickly. It took maybe 16 hours of transit from being shipped to me receiving it. And if it had stayed longer, like if it was coming from Asia and it was gonna take a week, these leaves probably would have sogged off because they're wet. And that's what you'll see a lot of plant hauls looking like when you're importing, depending on how they wrapped it and how long it's been in transit and how hot it was. Some of the plants come looking completely soggy and mushy, which is pretty much unsalvageable at that point. Sometimes they come super dry because sellers don't want to send a mushy plant, so then they don't leave enough moisture, and then it goes through really hot, dry climates, and then it comes dead and dry. You know, it can go either way. This plant for sure would have been mushy if it had been in transit for a while. But it wasn't, thankfully, and the seller knew that as well, so that also changes how they package things. So the fourth thing that I want to talk about is how plants are shipped in terms of their root ball. Oftentimes plants are shipped bare root, so they'll either wrap it with some like tissue paper or some plastic. This one, I can't really tell. I think there's some moss in it. Obviously there's paper towels and plastic, but I think there's moss inside, we'll find out. Usually if it's shipped with moss around the root ball, and this is where I really messed up on my first shipment from Bogana, and I'm dealing with the consequences right now, but they all came with moss and plastic wrapped around the moss root ball. And for some reason I was like, oh, I just plant the plant with the moss around the roots into soil and it'll be good. But don't do that. That was a huge mistake I made, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to make this video. Is I wish I had known that you're supposed to take the moss off of the roots and then plant it. The moss is only there temporarily to protect the roots and keep it moist and prevent it from drying out while it's in transit. But what's happening right now is I'm having to go through all the plants that I've received that I left the moss in the root ball, and I have to go dig it out of whatever pot I have in right now, and then some of the roots have grown out, and I'm having to gently pry off the moss, and it's much harder right now because the roots have grown in. The reason I'm doing that is because the moss is not really great for controlling water. So either it gets too wet or it's hydrophobic when it's not wet enough, and so the water ends up sort of bouncing off of the moss ball and going into the rest of the pot, so then that causes the soil to compact in a different way. There's been so many problems with it. So far my plants have survived, none of them have died from this, but I was going through last night looking at the root ball and trying to fix some of the mistakes I made, and you can see that the roots of, like, if there's the root ball, you can see that the roots, basically the ones that developed, sort of came outside of the ball and then started developing sort of on the side of it. So the inside part with the moss doesn't actually have that many roots in it, and it's because, you know, it either has too much water or too little, so either the roots rotted or they dried out, and that's not ideal. So I was wondering why my plants were taking so long to acclimate, and I do think that it's because I messed up with that moss ball. So if you get anything from this video, just if you get plants shipped bare roots but with moss all around the roots, make sure you carefully take the moss off. All right. So this paper towel is extremely wet. She wrapped it in moss, and I will be removing the moss before I plant this. But it's a good chunky system. And this is a bottom cutting, so you'll see that she took another cutting up top. And I don't see any new growth yet, but there's plenty of big roots outside. So I don't know how long it's gonna take for me to see a new growth point, but it looks great. I'm gonna take this bottom leaf off. It's likely that I lose this leaf too. It's starting to look a little yellow, but I might be able to keep the top 3 leaves. The reason why this is called a red moon is they have these pretty red colorings along with the typical green color of the plant. So I am super excited about this. The new growth too tends to have a really bright splash of red, so it's not going to be as muted as this one. But I am stoked, and I will be carefully removing the moss, and I'm going to do other things to sanitize it. I'm going to spray it all around with neem oil. And with the roots, I'm probably going to dip this plant into a mix of hydrogen peroxide and water just to sterilize it a little bit. As long as the hydrogen peroxide isn't super strong, it should be fine and won't damage the plant. But you don't want to keep it in hydrogen peroxide for a long time because it could kill the plant. So there's a fine balance. I'll probably dip it in hydrogen peroxide water mix for a little bit, maybe like a few minutes, and then rinse it all off with water and then do the neem oil. So that's my plan. And that leads me to the 5th thing that I wish I had known before importing. You need to quarantine your plants. I think that's like maybe obvious for some people, but it wasn't super obvious for me. Even with new plants that you get from like your local grocery or nursery, or even someone who's giving you a plant, you never know what that plant is going to come with. So you really want to make sure that you're quarantining any new plant you get away from the rest of your collection. There's a lot of viruses that just can't be stopped once they start latching onto a plant, and you would hate for your brand new beautiful plant to introduce something terrible to the other plants that you have, and then you end up losing all of your collection. So definitely want to quarantine new plants. Everyone has like a different rule of thumb. Some people say, well, if it's not coming from too far, just neem oil it and then you can reintroduce it in like a week. Some people say 2 months, some people say 3 months. I have been mixing it up. I've probably been doing it somewhere between 1 to 3 months, depending on if I see any obvious clear signs of bugs or problems. Also, how much space I have. I don't have that much space in my grow room, and that's the best place for me to rehabilitate new imports. So sometimes, it's up to you how much risk you want to take, but you really should be quarantining your plants and trying to prevent introducing new bugs or new diseases to the rest of your collection. Those are the 5 things that I really wish I had known before I imported my first set of plants. It's worked out fine, and my plants are doing well, and I haven't lost a plant yet from the imports, so I've been very lucky with how they've been arriving. I've seen some of my friends getting really mushy plants, some of them getting really dry plants, and a lot of this has to do with additional shipping complexity due to COVID and reduced people working, and there's just a lot of logistical challenges right now. So growers are doing their best to get the plants to you in the best condition possible, but there's a lot of other things to consider aside from what the grower is doing, and I thought I would share in case it was helpful for anyone thinking about importing plants, or even if you've imported plants recently. It's not too late to take the moss out of your root ball. I've only imported a handful of times, so I do want to say that although these are things that I definitely think would have been useful for me to know, I am no subject matter expert here. If you have additional advice or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below so we can all learn together and really try to make the best of our experience as plant collectors. Hopefully this was helpful though, and I will see you next video.